Dear administrators and staff, my name is Brian Kernican, and I would like to talk about the use of intervention techniques before labeling students as special education. Oftentimes in schools, we see kids that are struggling or failing. They're falling behind in class, and they're hard to manage. So the teacher decides to put them in special education, which can be very detrimental to their future, their success in the future, because they just get put down and they have a hard time getting back out. To begin, special education was started in 1975, created by a bunch of parents who lobbied together because they felt like their students weren't receiving, their kids actually weren't receiving a proper education. Many times the special ed or the kids that had learning difficulties such as Down syndrome or autism weren't given enough education at all. The schools wouldn't even let them in. Today, in the school system, special education is run under IDEA. What happens when a student is labeled as special education is that they're given an IEP. In this IEP, there's annual goals that the staff and teachers try to meet. They're given also modifications, they're given accommodations, and this is all through an individualized identification program or IEP. Now that you have a basic idea of what special education is, I would like to discuss a change I see fitting in today's public education system. What I would like to see changed is the use of intervention techniques rather than placing a student in SPED. Well, why? Why? Because it can be very detrimental to their success and their future. One of the downfalls of labeling students is that it puts blame on the students rather than the teacher, when in reality it could be the teacher. Not only that, but when a student is classified as SPED, most often they will never leave that type of learning environment. This cycle continues to hurt the student from grade to grade, eventually until graduation. After graduation, SPED students have a hard time finding success in the adult world. Author W.L. Hillard writes, "Some educators believe that the labels used to identify and classify exceptional children today stigmatize them and deny them opportunities in the mainstream." So teachers, staff, and administrators, we are asked to diagnose the situation. And although we have come a long way in society in regards to our school system, many educators and parents alike can see possible reasons for the failure of students due to lack of intervention techniques. One of the major components that is to be blamed for lack of intervention is the faulty internal systems or lack of collaboration between the departments in a school environment. In our school system today, we have a wide range of tools that can be used for intervention. Some of these tools include psychologists, teachers, and behaviorists. With such a wide range of people dealing with students who are falling behind, we can see a lack of communication between all parties. For example, when a teacher begins to see a student struggle, they oftentimes inquire about the student getting tested for special education. With proper communication between all staff, a student may be able to acquire a plan for success through the use of counselors or behaviorists. According to LaPlante in 1979, the flow of communications in schools should reinforce the relationship between staff members, students, and parents. For example, we might have a student who has been very successful in previous years, and then he starts to fail. Right away, the teacher begins to notice, but he does not know the reasons behind the student's failures. The student might be struggling because of his home life or negative peer interactions outside of the school environment. This would be an important time for the teacher to communicate with the school counselors so he or she can open the line of communications between said student and counselor. Then, the counselor can begin to diagnose the problem and maybe even begin to develop coping strategies with the student. Communications with counselors is in the utmost importance of that student's success. If the communications from the teacher and the counselors improve, we could possibly see students with minor problems succeed in the classroom. Furthermore, lack of communication can also be in large part due to the efforts of an overwhelmed counselor. With so many students under one counselor's load, they can begin to feel overwhelmed and unable to communicate with the parents or teachers. One of the ways that your school system can help with communication on all parties is to make sure the counselors on each caseload are at a minimum. With proper caseloads, counselors will be able to establish lines of communication with teachers and parents, allowing for the best learning environment. For the student, Whether it's from the student to the counselor or the parent to teacher, communication plays a vital role in intervention of a struggling student. So what are some possible solutions? Well, how could we increase communications in schools? We can increase communications with the idea of banking time. Banking time is an evidence-based strategy developed by Robert Plant, Dean of the Curry School of Education in the University of Virginia. What banking time is are 10 to 15 one-on-one sessions with the teacher and the student where the student takes the lead. This happens about 1 or 2 times a week. Banking time should happen no matter how the child is behaving, and it also must be consistent throughout the year. This installs a sense that no matter how hard of a day the student is having, they'll be able to count on the teacher and the teacher giving them time to develop coping strategies. The teacher's role during banking time is to observe the challenging student, which means carefully watching and taking notes. Through banking time, a student will be able to connect with the teacher, giving that level of comfort to the student that he or she did not have before. Also, with banking time, teachers will be given time to meet and collaborate with other teachers and staff on a weekly basis. During this time, the teachers and staff can go over what's coming up next in curriculum, along with concerns that they have at the moment. Banking time allows for teachers and staff alike to communicate like they never have before. I believe that this approach of banking time will increase communication in schools, allowing for less kids to be in the special education environment. Another way that we can increase communication with staff is through the use of technology in the classroom. With a computer at each teacher's hand, they should be able to email or be a phone call away with talking to another. Another effective solution for creating less special education students in the school environment is to use different types of teaching techniques. We all know that students learn at a different way. Some learn verbally, some learn visually. So if we cater to the needs of our students by developing different strategies, we'll be able to have students who are better prepared to learn. For example, many times in history classes, students learn by taking notes and going over and over again by using rote learning. Some students would struggle in that environment because taking notes is probably one of their weak points. So instead of a note-taking class, they can join a class that has visual learning. So they use pictures, they can use drawings on the board to help them memorize instead of taking notes and stuff like that. So another a thing to help for kids that are struggling in the classroom is to develop styles of teaching that are next. Placing a student in the least restrictive environment is very beneficial for the current and future success of the child. Least restrictive environments make sure that the special education student is in a general education classroom receiving the best education possible. Not only do schools want the students to receive the same education as their peers, but they want them to feel like all the other students. If the student doesn't feel normal, most likely they will not succeed. Lastly, informal academic assessments such as RenStar allow for educators to find strengths and weaknesses of a student, which can allow for a student to understand the areas that he or she needs help. Not only will it allow for students to understand their weaknesses, informal academic assessments allow for parents to understand if their student should be placed in special ed or not. If the student's test scores show that he or she is not doing well, but the parent is requested for special education, our school system has a proper documentation to show that their student does not require special assistance. STAR assessments provide the most valid, reliable, actionable data and the least amount of testing time, usually around 20 minutes or less. That empowers educators to focus on what matters, individualized instructions to accelerate learning for all students. In the end, with STAR tests or any data tests at schools, educators are able to get the data that they need to help understand and develop their students. We're able to see through testing which lesson plan and materials work throughout the year and are able to modify curriculum to fit these students' learnings. So administrators, the best possible solution that I see fit for struggling students to keep them out of special education would be the idea of banking time. The reason why banking time is so effective is because it develops a better sense of understanding of who the student is, and it lets the student connect with the teacher. If a student has a better connection with the teacher, they will be able to overcome obstacles which they would not have been able to do before. Again, banking time is an evidence-based strategy that allows for one-on-one interaction between the student and the teacher, around 2 to 3 times a week. During this meeting, the student will be given 10 to 15 minute sessions over an 8-week period where the student leads and the teacher follows. Since banking time is not centered around learning goals, the student is able to make connections with the teacher, which would not happen in the classroom setting. Sarah Epstein, a teacher who experimented with banking time under the guidance from the National Research Center, states, "Few times a teacher can focus attention on one child, especially in a class with young children. Your attention goes in a lot of different directions. You have to pay attention to all the children, even when you're trying to talk to one of them, which can make them feel neglected. During banking time with students, the teacher lets the student lead, imitating what the child is doing or saying. This allows for the student to make a connection with the teacher that will not be allowed if the teacher was in the classroom environment with other students. In addition, banking time allows students to understand that their interaction with the teacher matters. These interactions that happen during banking time allow for emotional support and additional instructional support and organization. Emotional support is important because it lets the student get a sense that the teacher is there for them. Since students in your classroom can have a wide range of emotions and emotional support is needed, this can be taken care of during this banking time. So how can you give emotional support to a struggling student? First, it is important for teachers to use outside resources such as behaviorists. Behaviorists can implement plans to reduce problem behaviors. For example, if a student is having a hard time with controlling impulsive behaviors, the behaviorist can set a plan where if a teacher is in proximity, that allows the student to understand that what they're doing at the time is not appropriate. This banking time with the behaviorist and the teacher allows for you to develop a practical solution to a problem. Furthermore, emotional support can be done by having the student come to the class before or after. During this time, the teacher can talk with the student and ask questions about how the student is doing inside of the classroom. Also, during this time, the teacher can go over classroom expectations with the child, also with appropriate behavior. In the article, When Students Need Emotional Support, author Megan Mathis states, it lets them know that you're aware of what they need and how to be successful in the classroom. If the student has a history of challenging behaviors, it can also be helpful to let them know that you're aware of their past, but you are a fair teacher who will treat them as if they were any other student.